you've got older goats, a 14-year-old doe and two 12-year-olds, a doe and a wether. When you say they're dropping weight, what exactly does that mean?
They're just losing condition. Their rumens seem big enough, but their top line is definitely bony compared to the younger ones, what I'm used to.
So, unless they have dental problems, which can happen with older goats, normally the reason that goats lose weight is because they have a parasite problem. Have you checked their eyelids?
Not lately, but I have in the past, and they seem okay, and they've never gotten any diarrhea or anything.
So, barber pole worm does not cause diarrhea, it causes anemia. And other worms cause diarrhea, but they don't cause anemia. So, diarrhea and anemia don't usually go hand in hand unless a goat has two different or three or four multiple kinds of worms at the same time. And I have had people contact me and say, oh, my goat was 3 months ago, had a clean fecal, the famacha was good. And I'm like, it really sounds like your goats might have a worm problem. And they come back and it's like, oh my God, they have white eyelids. So the first thing you need to do is check their eyelids to see if they're anemic. So two things happen to older goats. One is their teeth can go, literally go out of their mouth. And the other thing that can happen is that their immune system is just not as strong as it used to be. So you may suddenly see worm problems in an older goat, even though they never had them before, because their immune system just is not as strong as it used to be. And really, you should be checking their eyelids at least monthly. Literally can change so fast. And barber pole worm is the worst because a single barber pole worm can lay 10,000 eggs in one day. Like that just blew me away. I had to see that in multiple places, including the 2023 edition of Goat Medicine, before I believed it, because that sounds so crazy. All the other roundworms can only lay a few hundred eggs a day. But this is why barber pole worms can become such a problem. Now, remember, eggs do not hatch inside the goat. But what happens is if a single worm lays 10,000 eggs and your goat poops, there's hundreds of thousands of eggs that they are pooping out on your pasture in a single day. So that means that when those eggs hatch in a few days and then they mature into infective larvae, that if the goats eat the grass that has those worm larvae on it, then they can wind up with a bad case of barber pole. And so they can go from fine to like half dead within just a few days with barber pole. That's why it's so insidious, is because they can wind up with such a bad case so fast. So checking the eyelids is the most important thing. Checking the teeth is hard. Hopefully their teeth are good, because once their teeth fall out, it can get challenging depending on exactly how picky they are in terms of eating. The pickier they are, the harder it can be to get them fed. One thing is, when you watch them eat, one sign that they might have a problem is that you'll see food falling out of their mouth. That could mean that they have a problem with their teeth. And if they do, then senior horse feeds are usually a good option for them. I remember I had an old goat one time that was having problems, and I bought the senior horse feed and I could literally crumble it between my fingers. Like, that's how soft it is. Because as someone else told me, senior horse feeds are made for horses that have lost their teeth. They're meant to be gummed up.
The goats seem to eat okay, but I was wondering if a senior horse feed would be a good way to make them satisfied. They do love to eat, and I just never know if they're eating enough to be satisfied. I know they don't chew hay as well as the younger ones do. They're picky, little pieces instead of big bites like the younger ones do. They just wolf it down like they're vacuum.
Yeah, that's definitely a problem with older goats.
And I just went to teff grass pellet. I do want to separate my old goats from my young ones and then be able to just leave the soaked pellets out for them to eat.
Yeah, teff is probably a better option. And teff has a little more protein, which is not such a bad thing for old goats. You mentioned beet pulp. Beet pulp is not good for goats. Like, it's very low in protein. It's on the level of grass hay. So there's just no reason to feed beet pulp to goats because it's an inferior food. It's a cheap food. Meat producers and feedlots, they are the ones who popularize this because it's a cheap way to fill up their guts. But the protein in it is the same as grass hay, which is not a lot. So it's really not going to put meat on your goats if they're getting skinny. So the teff hay, I think, is a great option because it's higher in protein than most grass hays. It's higher in protein than the beet pulp, but it's lower in calcium than the alfalfa, which they don't need calcium at their age, but they might need protein. But the most important thing is checking to make sure they don't have a high worm load, because if they have a high worm load, you can feed them all day long until they've got these massive bellies and look like they're pregnant, but they're still going to be skinny along their spine and everything, because you're spending all your money feeding the worms.